The Taliban commander's boots slammed into the CIA officer's ribs once, twice, three times, each impact echoing across the compound like a death sentence being stamped in real time. Blood sprayed from the American's mouth as he crumpled hands zip-tied behind his back, and the commander laughed a sound so cold it could freeze hell itself. He grabbed the officer by the hair, yanking his head back, and spoke in broken English, loud enough for the hidden surveillance drone to capture every word. Tomorrow morning, your country watches you die, on camera, screaming. The feed cut to black in the operations center 4,000 miles away, and Commander Bryson's fist came down on the table hard enough to crack the wood. 12 hours, that's all they had. 12 hours before an American hero became a propaganda execution video. But before we go any further into this impossible mission, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with this story until the very end, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about courage. And drop a comment telling me what city you were watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to that operations room where 15 of the Navy's deadliest snipers were about to face the shot that would break them. Commander Bryson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Listen up. No air support. Intel says there are 11 hostages in that compound. Locals who will help with us. One bomb and they all die. This has to be surgical. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, 22 years in the SEALs. 300 confirmed kills stepped forward. His face was granite. What's the distance, sir? 4,200 yards. The room went silent. Someone whispered a curse. Another man shook his head. 4,200 yards wasn't a sniper shot. It was a physics experiment. At that range, you weren't aiming at a person. You were aiming at where a person would be in 6 seconds, accounting for wind that changed every 100 feet of altitude, the spin of the earth, the temperature drop of the bullet as it flew, even the humidity in the air. The target is Commander Khalid Nasser. Bryson continued, pulling up a grainy photo on the screen. He moves between 3 buildings every 4 hours. We've got a 4-second window when he crosses the courtyard. Miss that window, he disappears for another rotation. Miss enough windows, and our man dies at sunrise. Webb's jaw tightened. We'll take rotating shifts, 3 shooters at a time. We'll get him. Bryson nodded, but his eyes held something darker, doubt he'd never admit out loud. Because everyone in that room knew the ugly truth, the longest confirmed sniper kill in history was 3,700 yards. They were asking these men to beat that record by 500 yards, in combat conditions, with a human life ticking away like a time bomb. 3 hours later, the sniper positions were set on a ridge overlooking the valley. 15 elite operators, the best long-range shooters the military had ever produced. Webb took the first shot. He spent 11 minutes calculating, adjusting for a wind that kept shifting like it had a personal vendetta. His spotter called it wind 3.2, left to right gusting, temperature dropping, Coriolis effect compensated. Webb's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle barked. The sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder. 6 seconds of silence. Then nothing. The bullet hit dirt 20 feet left of target. Damn it! Webb's voice cracked with frustration he rarely showed. He'd made shots at 3,200 yards in his sleep. This was different. This was impossible. Sniper 2 stepped up. Master Chief Ramirez, 16 years down, range a legend in naval special warfare. He adjusted based on Webb's miss, compensated, harder for the wind. Fired. 6 seconds. The bullet struck a wall, close, but close, didn't save lives. 3 more shooters, 3 more misses. Each one closer, but closer was just another word for failure when a man's life was on the line. The Taliban commander appeared right on schedule, crossing that courtyard like he owned the world. 4 seconds of exposure. 4 seconds where 15 of America's finest couldn't touch him. He disappeared into the building, and somewhere in that compound, the CIA officer heard the countdown in his head grow shorter. 6 hours gone, 6 hours closer to dawn. Shooter 7 missed high. Shooter 8 missed left. Shooter 9's rifle jammed a mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. He cleared it with shaking hands, while everyone pretended not to notice. When he fired, the shot went wide. Commander Bryson stood behind the line, watching his best operators fail one by one, and felt something he hadn't felt in 23 years of service: helplessness. Pure, suffocating helplessness. These men could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards. They'd save countless lives with their precision. But this distance, these conditions, it was like asking them to shoot the moon. Shooter 12 was a kid from Texas who'd won every marksmanship competition the Navy offered. His hands didn't shake. His breathing was perfect. His calculations were flawless. He fired, and for a moment, everyone held their breath. 6 seconds felt like 6 hours. The round hit a support beam 18 inches right of where the commander had been standing. "We're running out of time," Bryson said quietly. Shooter 13 stepped up, then 14. Both missed. The Taliban commander crossed that courtyard 3 more times over the next 2 hours, and 15 elite snipers couldn't put a scratch on him. The frustration turned into something worse: acceptance. The kind of acceptance that shows up when good men realize they're about to fail someone who's counting on them. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours until the world watched an American die screaming. That's when she spoke. "Sir, I can make that shot." The voice came from behind the line, quiet, steady, completely out of place. Every head turned. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb actually blinked like he was seeing a ghost, because standing there holding a rifle maintenance kit, wearing a uniform that barely fit her frame, was Specialist Cassandra Brennan, the armorer, the support tech, the woman who'd spent 3 months on this forward base cleaning weapons, running supplies, making coffee, and being completely invisible to every operator in the unit. Webb's face went from confusion to anger in half a heartbeat. "Brennan, get back to—" "I can make the shot," she repeated, and this time there was something in her voice that made the anger die in Webb's throat. Not aggression, not desperation, just certainty. The kind of certainty you can't fake. Commander Bryson studied her for a long moment. He'd barely noticed her existence before this moment. Support personnel blended into the background like wallpaper. "Specialist, with all due respect, we've got 15 master-rated snipers who can't make this shot. What makes you think—" "Because they're shooting with instinct, sir. This shot doesn't work with instinct. It works with math." The silence that followed could have cut steel. Master Chief Ramirez actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Math, kid, we've been doing math for 6 hours. Wind calculations, Coriolis spin drift, temperature gradients. You've been estimating," Cass interrupted, and the fact that she interrupted a Master Chief made several men's jaws drop. "You're using field calculations designed for 3,000 yards and hoping they scale. They don't. Not at this distance. The error compounds exponentially." Webb's face had gone from angry to dangerous. "Brennan, I don't know what YouTube videos you've been watching, but my grandfather was Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Brennan, 1st Marine Division, Silver Star recipient. He held the Corps' long-range record for 11 years before he retired." Cass's voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "He taught me to shoot before I could ride a bike. Not instinct shooting, science shooting. I've been competing in extreme long-range competitions since I was 16. Under different names because nobody takes a woman seriously in this field. I've made verified shot at 4,100 yards, in competition conditions with verified witnesses and measurement equipment." The skepticism in the room was thick enough to choke on, but Commander Bryson saw something else, something in her eyes that reminded him of every underestimated operator who'd ever proven the doubters wrong. "What do you need?" "The M200 Chaytak from the weapons cache. The one with the advanced ballistic computer. 20 minutes to calibrate, and everyone to stop talking while I work." Webb's face had gone purple. "Sir, you can't be serious. We're going to trust a rescue mission to the coffee girl because her grandfather was a better shooter than you'll ever be, Staff Sergeant." Cass's voice cut like a whip, and for the first time, Webb saw something in her eyes that made him shut his mouth. "You've missed 12 shots because you're compensating for your ego instead of the wind. Your breathing pattern is off by 0.3 seconds. You're anticipating recoil instead of accepting it, and you're using Kentucky windage instead of actual atmospheric modeling." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Webb's face went through about 6 different shades of red before settling on white, because everything she just said was true, and everyone there knew it. Bryson made his decision. "You've got 20 minutes, Specialist. After that, we're back to the rotation." Cass nodded once and moved to the weapons cache. The M200 Chaytak was a beast, a rifle system designed for exactly this kind of impossible shot. She pulled it out with the kind of confidence that only comes from intimate familiarity. Her hands moved across the weapon like a pianist's, across keys, checking tolerances, calibrating the advanced ballistic computer, making micro adjustments that most of the men watching didn't even understand. Master Chief Ramirez stepped closer, his skepticism warring with curiosity. What are you doing with the scope mounting? Compensating for barrel harmonics at extreme range. The bullet doesn't leave the barrel in a straight line. It spirals based on the rifling and the barrel's natural vibration frequency. At 4,000 yards, that spiral becomes a factor. She didn't look up, didn't stop working. Your standard scope mounting assumes the spiral averages out. It doesn't, not at this distance. Ramirez blinked. He'd been shooting for 16 years and never heard anyone talk about barrel harmonics in a tactical setting. Where'd you learn that? University of Montana. I have a degree in applied physics, ballistics specialty. Webb made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a choke. You're telling me you've got a physics degree and you enlisted as an armorer? I enlisted because nobody hires female long-range shooting consultants, staff sergeant. The military was the only place I could get near the weapons and training I needed. Cass finally looked up, and her eyes were harder than anyone expected. Turns out I was wrong. The military just put me in the armory and assumed I'd be happy making coffee. The honesty of it hit like a slap. Bryson felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut, the realization that they'd wasted 3 months of expertise because nobody bothered to look past a female face in a support role. 15 minutes, Bryson said quietly. Cass returned to her work. She pulled out a battered notebook, leather-bound pages yellowed with age. Inside were handwritten formulas, atmospheric tables, correction factors that looked like they belonged in a physics textbook rather than a sniper's kit. My grandfather's notes, she said to no one in particular. 50 years of long-range shooting data. He made me memorize every page before he'd let me touch a rifle. The Taliban commander was due to cross the courtyard again in 32 minutes. One more chance before the rotation cycle changed. One more window before the math changed, and they'd have to recalculate everything. Cass set up her position, and the way she moved made even Webb pause. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She built her shooting platform with the precision of a surgical procedure, sandbags positioned to the millimeter rifle cant, adjusted for the Earth's rotation body position, optimized for the 6-second hold she'd need. Spotter, she said, and Master Chief Ramirez stepped up, his skepticism giving way to professional curiosity. Wind, she asked. Ramirez checked his instruments. 3.4 miles per hour left to right at ground level, gusting to 5.1. Upper atmosphere reading shows I need actual wind readings at 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 yards. Not estimates, actual readings. Ramirez stared at her. We don't have instrumentation for, yes you do, the drone. Send it on a vertical path along the bullet trajectory. Have it measure wind speed every 500 yards. Bryson pulled out his radio before Ramirez could argue. Drone operator, you heard the specialist. Make it happen. 8 minutes later, they had real data. Wind that shifted dramatically at different altitudes, something the field calculations had been averaging out. Cass fed the numbers into her ballistic computer and cross-referenced them with her grandfather's notes. Her lips moved silently, running calculations that would take most people a calculator in 10 minutes. Temperature, she asked. 62 degrees Fahrenheit at firing position, estimated 58 in the valley. I need actual temperature at target. Use the drone's thermal sensor. More data, more calculations. Cass's fingers flew across the ballistic computer, inputting variables that most of the watching snipers had never even considered. Barometric pressure at both locations, humidity differential, even the angle of the sun and how it would affect air density over the next 20 minutes. You're overthinking this, Webb said, but his voice had lost its edge. He was watching a master at work, and professional respect was breaking through his ego. No, Cass replied without looking up. You were underthinking it. At this range, every variable matters. The difference between a kill and a miss is 0.2 millirods of error. That's the width of a human hair in your scope at 1,000 yards. Now multiply that by 4. Ramirez let out a low whistle. Jesus. 5 minutes until the window. Cass settled into her shooting position, and the transformation was startling. The quiet support tech disappeared, replaced by something else entirely, a predator locked on to prey. Her breathing slowed, deepened, fell into a rhythm that seemed to sync with the wind itself. Range is 4,200 yards, she said quietly. Flight time 6.3 seconds. Wind will push the round 18 inches left at mid-flight, then 6 inches back right in the final 1,000 yards due to the valley effect. Coriolis drift at this latitude is 8.2 inches right. Spin drift is 4.7 inches left. Temperature differential will slow the round by approximately 40 feet per second in the last 2,000 yards, creating an additional 6-inch drop. Total holdover is... She paused, and in that moment, every person watching held their breath, because they were watching someone speak a language they'd thought they were fluent in, only to realize they'd barely learned the alphabet. 23.6 milliradians up 1.8 right. Cass made the final adjustment on her scope. Spotter confirmed target zone. Ramirez pressed his eye to his spotting scope. Courtyard entrance, 3 figures visible. Middle figure matches target profile. They're moving toward the crossing point. Time to window, 90 seconds. Cass's hands settled on the rifle with the kind of gentle firmness that separates amateurs from artists. When he enters the courtyard, I need complete silence. No movement. Even your breathing affects the air pressure around my barrel. It should have sounded arrogant. Somehow it just sounded like fact. The men around her, hardened operators who'd seen combat in 6 countries, found themselves holding still, like school children waiting for the teacher's approval. 60 seconds, Ramirez whispered. Cass's breathing changed again, slowing even further. 4 breaths per minute, maybe less. Her body became absolutely still, fused with the rifle and the earth beneath her. He'll cross left to right, she said, voice barely audible. 4-second window. I'm taking the shot at second 2.3. That's when his stride puts his center mass in the optimal position relative to cover. Webb leaned toward Bryson and whispered, "She's calling the exact second of the shot before she even sees the target." Bryson didn't respond. He was watching Cass's face, and what he saw there was something he'd seen maybe a dozen times in his career, the absolute zone that elite operators entered when they stopped thinking and started becoming. When the mission wasn't something you did, but something you were. 30 seconds. The world contracted, 15 snipers, a commander, 2 spotters, all frozen in place. Somewhere 4,200 yards away, a Taliban commander who tortured 3 American prisoners and executed 7 locals was about to step into a courtyard, completely unaware that his life was being measured in fractions of seconds by a woman he'd never met. 15 seconds. Target emerging from building. Cass's finger moved to the trigger, not on it yet, just near it, waiting. "Visual confirmation?" she asked. Ramirez's voice was tight. "Positive ID. Target is Khalid Nasir. He's moving to the courtyard. 3 guards with him. Entering the crossing zone in 5, 4, 3. The Taliban commander stepped into the courtyard. 4 seconds. That's all they had. 4 seconds for a bullet to travel over the 2 miles through shifting, wind-changing air pressure and the rotation of the earth itself. 4 seconds to save a man's life or watch him die at dawn. 2. Cass's world reduced to a single point. Not the man in her scope, he was just math now, just vectors and velocity and wind drift. The single point was the moment between heartbeats, the space between breaths, the instant when the universe held still long enough for impossibility to become reality. 1. Her finger pressed the trigger. Not jerked, not pulled, pressed. Like she was making a promise to physics itself. The rifle roared, but Cass was already beyond the sound, beyond the recoil, beyond everything except the certainty that she'd done the math right. 6.3 seconds. That's how long it takes a bullet to travel 4,200 yards at 2,800 feet per second, accounting for deceleration. 6.3 seconds where the bullet climbed, drifted, fell, and fought its way through air that pushed back with every foot of travel. In the operations center, someone was counting. 1, 2, 3. The Taliban commander's head snapped back like someone had cut his strings. He dropped instantly. No stumble, no final step, just gravity, claiming a body that no longer had a brain, sending signals. His guards froze for a fraction of a second, confusion painted across their faces before they scattered like roaches when the light hits. Master Chief Ramirez's voice cracked through the silence. "Holy God, confirmed kill, target down." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 15 elite snipers stood there watching a woman they dismissed as the coffee girl achieve what they couldn't, and the weight of that reality hit like a freight train loaded with shame and disbelief. Cass's voice cut through the shock, calm as a surgeon calling for instruments. 4 more targets. Guards at positions 279 and the sniper nest on the north building. They'll call for reinforcements in approximately 40 seconds. Commander Bryson blinked his brain, trying to catch up with what his eyes had just witnessed. Specialist, we need to extract the hostage before Buffalo. Not yet, sir. Cass was already adjusting her scope, her hands moving with mechanical precision. The compound has a quick reaction force 300 yards east. They heard that shot echo through the valley. They're mobilizing right now. If we send in extraction before I clear the overwatch positions, our team gets shredded in the courtyard. Webb's face had gone from red to white to something resembling green. How do you know about the quick reaction force? That intel came in 2 hours ago during your shift in the armory. I read the brief while you were all sleeping, Staff Sergeant. Someone had to inventory the weapons cache, and I'm capable of doing 2 things at once. Cass's eye never left her scope. Spotter, give me wind at target. It's shifting. Ramirez scrambled back to his position, his hands shaking slightly. He'd been doing this job for 16 years, and in 16 years, he'd never seen anything like what he'd just witnessed. Wind is, Jesus, it's changed. Now 2.8, right to left, gusting to 4.1. Valley thermal inversion, sun's heating the rocks. I calculated for it. Cass's finger was already on the trigger. Guard at position 2 is moving to the radio. I'm taking him now. The rifle barked again. 3.8 seconds this time, shorter range, only 3,000 yards. The guard reaching for the radio transmitter collapsed across the equipment, his hand falling 6 inches short of the button that would have brought hell down on the rescue team. Position 7, Cass said and fired before anyone could respond. Another guard dropped, this one halfway through raising binoculars to scan the ridgeline. If he'd gotten those binoculars up, he might have spotted the glint from Cass's scope, might have called out their position. Instead, he was dead before his brain finished processing the thought. Webb found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd have liked. Brennan, you just made 3 kills at extreme range in under 90 seconds. That's not humanly possible. It's absolutely possible, Staff Sergeant. It just requires treating ballistics like the science it is instead of the art you want it to be. Cass adjusted her position slightly, compensating for the way the sandbags had settled under the rifle's recoil. Position 9 is behind hard cover. I need him to move. Spotter, do we have comm with the drone operator? Bryson was already on it, speaking into his radio with the clipped efficiency of a man whose world had just been turned sideways. Drone, this is actual. I need you to make a low pass over the north building, west side. Make them think we're about to hit them with a hellfire. The drone banked hard, dropping altitude as it screamed toward the compound. The guard at position 9 did exactly what Cass predicted. He broke cover to get a better angle on the incoming threat. Fatal mistake. The rifle spoke again, and he went down hard, his weapon clattering against the rocks as his body followed it to the ground. North building sniper nest. Ramirez called out, his voice tight with adrenaline. He's trying to relocate, moving toward the... Wait, he's stopping. He's looking right at us. Cass's breathing didn't change. Range, 3,800 yards. He's got a Dragunov, no way he can reach us at this distance, but he doesn't need to reach us. He needs to radio our position. Cass's calculations were already running. Wind is pushing harder at altitude, 4.6 left to right. He's exposed for maybe 3 more seconds before he reaches the stairwell. Her shot rang out before Ramirez finished inhaling. The enemy sniper pitched backward, his radio falling from his hand to shatter on the stones below. 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 kills. The statistical impossibility of it was breaking something fundamental in the minds of the men watching. Master Chief Ramirez pulled back from his spotting scope and just stared at her. Who the hell are you? Cass ejected the spent magazine, loaded a fresh one with movements so practiced they looked choreographed. I'm exactly who I told you I was, Master Chief. You just weren't listening. She keyed her radio. Commander Compound Overwatch is clear. You can send in the extraction team, but do it fast. That quick reaction force is going to figure out their radio silence in about 3 minutes. Bryson was already barking orders into his comm, but his eyes never left Cass. 23 years in the Navy, most of it in special operations, and he'd never seen shooting like this. Not from his SEALs, not from Marine Scout snipers, not from Delta Force operators, not from anyone. Extraction team, you are green light. Move now. The rescue team poured into the compound like water, finding a crack fast and fluid and absolutely lethal. They cleared rooms with the kind of brutal efficiency that comes from doing this dance 1,000 times. 2 minutes later, the CIA officer was being carried out on a stretcher, beaten half to death, but alive. Alive because a woman nobody took seriously had just rewritten the definition of impossible. But the mission wasn't over. Not even close. Cass's voice cut through the celebration before it could start. Contact. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. 12 No. 13 technical trucks. 50 to 60 fighters. They're moving fast. Webb grabbed his binoculars, spotted the dust cloud rising from the desert floor. Jesus Christ, that's a full assault force. Extraction team, you need to move now. The team leader's voice crackled back, stress bleeding through the radio discipline. We've got wounded. The hostage can't move fast. We need 5 more minutes to reach the extraction point. You don't have 5 minutes, Cass said, and there was something in her voice that made everyone stop and listen. Those trucks will have you in a crossfire in 4 minutes, 20 seconds. Commander, I can buy you time, but I need authorization to engage multiple targets at range. Bryson's mind was racing through protocols, rules of engagement, command structure. Cass wasn't a sniper. She wasn't even infantry. She was support personnel who just performed a miracle, and now she was asking for permission to start a one-woman war against 60 enemy fighters. Every regulation said no. Every instinct screamed yes. You're authorized, he said. Do what you do. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for the next decade. Cass shifted her focus to the approaching vehicles and began firing with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical. She wasn't aiming for people, she was aiming for trucks. Specifically, she was aiming for the engine blocks of the lead vehicles in a convoy moving at 40 miles per hour across broken terrain. First shot, the lead truck's engine exploded in a geyser of steam and oil. The vehicle slewed sideways, blocking the narrow desert path and forcing the trucks behind it to brake hard. Second shot, another engine block, another truck dead. The convoy was compressing like an accordion, vehicles jamming together as drivers tried to figure out what was happening. Third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot. Each one a direct hit on mechanical targets smaller than a basketball, moving at speed at ranges beyond what anyone thought possible. Cass was firing every 8 to 12 seconds, just enough time to recalculate for the wind shifts and the changing angles as the convoy tried to maneuver. She's not missing, Ramirez whispered, and there was something like religious awe in his voice. Not once, not a single miss. Webb had stopped arguing, stopped questioning, stopped doing anything except watching, because what he was witnessing broke every assumption he'd built in 22 years of military service. Snipers missed. Everyone missed. Even the best shooters in the world had off days, bad shots, rounds that went wide because of variables beyond human control. But Cass wasn't missing. Every trigger pull was a mechanical certainty, like she'd stopped being human and become some kind of ballistic computer made of flesh and bone and absolute precision. Truck 6 died. Truck 7. The convoy was in chaos now, fighters bailing out and trying to figure out where the hell death was coming from. They'd never seen incoming fire from this distance. Most of them didn't even know it was possible. They were spreading out, trying to establish a defensive perimeter, and that's when Cass switched tactics. Spotter, give me high-value targets. Anyone with a radio or RPG? Ramirez's training kicked in despite his shock. Target 4 o'clock from disabled truck 3. Male carrying what looks like a radio pack. Range 4,100 yards. Cass fired. The radio operator spun and dropped. Another voice would never call for reinforcements, another coordination node cut from the enemy network. She was dismantling their command structure from 2.5 miles away, and they couldn't do a damn thing about it. RPG gunner moving behind truck 5. Shot. Kill. The RPG fell unfired, its wielder crumpling, before he could shoulder the weapon that might have brought down the extraction helicopter. The Taliban fighters were panicking now, and panic made people do stupid things. A group of 8 men tried to rush forward using the disabled trucks as cover, leapfrogging toward what they thought was safety. Cass picked them off one by one, her shots coming so fast and so accurate that the survivors broke and ran. Professional soldiers don't break easily. It takes a special kind of terror to make hardened fighters abandon their positions. But when death comes invisible and unstoppable from a distance, your brain says shouldn't exist when there's no cover that works and no defense that matters. Even the bravest men realize they're not fighting an enemy. They're fighting a force of nature. Extraction team is at the LZ, Bryson called out. Helicopter is inbound 30 seconds out. Cass kept firing. 2 more trucks disabled. 3 more fighters down. She was creating such absolute chaos in the enemy formation that they'd forgotten all about the escaping Americans. Their entire focus was on survival, on finding cover from a ghost sniper who seemed to see through walls and shoot through impossibilities. The helicopter swept in low and fast, rotors screaming. The extraction team loaded the wounded and the rescued hostage in movements practiced to the point of instinct. 15 seconds. The helicopter was vulnerable for 15 seconds while men climbed aboard and crew chiefs secured the wounded. An enemy fighter popped up with an RPG, having somehow kept his nerve while his unit fell apart around him. He shouldered the weapon finger on the trigger, angle perfect for a shot that would turn the helicopter into a fireball. Brave man, dedicated man, dead man. Cass's round hit him in the center of mass before he could fire, and the RPG clattered harmlessly to the ground. Extraction complete, the helicopter pilot radioed. We are clear and climbing. The sound of the helicopter faded into the distance, taking with it a man who would have died at dawn if not for a woman the military had designated as a coffee maker. Cass fired 3 more shots, keeping the enemy pinned, keeping them scattered, keeping them convinced that death still owned this valley. Then she went silent. The sudden absence of gunfire was louder than the shots had been. Master Chief Ramirez counted in his head. 23 shots, 23 hits, 11 trucks disabled, 12 enemy fighters killed 1 helicopter, saved 1 hostage, rescued 1 impossible mission, accomplished by a specialist who wasn't supposed to be capable of any of this. Webb's voice came out quiet, stripped of everything except honest truth. I was wrong about you, Brennan. I was so goddamn wrong I don't even have words for it. Cass pulled back from her rifle, her face slick with sweat despite the cold air. You weren't wrong, Staff Sergeant. You just didn't ask the right questions. Nobody did. She began breaking down her position with the same methodical precision she'd used to build it. When you see a woman in a support role, you assume that's all she's capable of. You don't check her file. You don't ask about her background. You definitely don't wonder if maybe, just maybe, she's there because she couldn't get assigned anywhere else. The words landed like grenades. Bryson felt them hit, felt the truth in them detonate against his assumptions. You requested sniper training when you enlisted. 4 times, sir. Got rejected every time. Not because of my scores, I maxed everything. Not because of my fitness, I beat the male PT standards. I got rejected because some captain and personnel decided women don't belong in Scout sniper school, and that captain's opinion was worth more than my abilities. Cass packed her gear with movements that had gone cold mechanical. So I became an armorer. Figured at least I'd be close to the weapons, close to the people using them. Maybe get a chance to prove myself eventually. Took 3 years, took 15 better qualified men failing. But I got my chance. Nobody spoke. What do you say to that? What words exist to address the reality that the person who just saved the mission had been systematically excluded from the training that would have made her even better at it? Ramirez found his voice first. Those competition wins you mentioned, extreme long range, were they real? Montana State Championship, 2019 under the name Casey Burns, Wyoming Open, 2020 under the name C.J. Brennan, National Precision Rifle Championship, 2021, I placed 3rd overall and 1st in the 4,000-yard stage. All verified, all recorded, all completely ignored when I tried to use them to get into sniper training. Cass shouldered her rifle case. Turns out competition shooting doesn't count if the person doing it isn't the gender you expect. Webb looked like he'd been punched in the gut because he'd been one of the selection instructors 2 years ago. He'd seen her application. He'd probably been one of the voices saying no. The realization was written all over his face and it was eating him alive. The radio crackled. The extraction helicopter was safely away. The hostage was getting medical treatment. The mission was a success. In a few hours, the official report would be written. Recommendations would be made. Medals would probably be discussed. And Cass would go back to the armory cleaning weapons for men who could now claim they'd worked alongside the woman who'd made the impossible shot. But right now, in this moment, something shifted. Commander Bryson looked at the woman standing in front of him and made a decision that would ripple through the entire Special Operations community. Specialist Brennan effective immediately, you're reassigned. You're done with the armory. You're done making coffee. You're done being invisible. Cass met his eyes. With respect, sir, I've heard that before. I've heard promises from officers who said things would change. Then nothing changed except the excuses got more creative. I'm not promising change, Bryson said. I'm ordering it. You just saved an American life and proved that our entire selection system is fundamentally broken. That doesn't get swept under a rug. That gets addressed. He turned to Webb. Staff Sergeant, you're going to personally sponsor Specialist Brennan's application to Scout Sniper School. You're going to make sure it goes through. And if anyone in the pipeline has a problem with it, they can come explain their problem to me. Webb swallowed hard. The order was forcing him to confront his own biases head on, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. Yes, sir. It'll be my honor. I don't want your honor, Cass said, and the edge in her voice could have cut glass. I want competence. I want instructors who grade based on performance, not assumptions. I want a system that doesn't require me to save lives before anyone takes me seriously. You'll get it, Bryson promised, or I'll burn down the pipeline trying. The sun was starting to set over the Afghan desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that had no business being that beautiful in a place that ugly. The team began packing up, preparing for the movement back to base. Normal conversation slowly returned, though it was quieter than usual, more thoughtful. Men who'd been doing this job their entire adult lives were reassessing everything they thought they knew. Ramirez sidled up to Cass as she was securing her gear. That notebook. Your grandfather's. Can I see it? Cass hesitated, then pulled the leather-bound journal from her pack. She handed it over like she was handing over a piece of her soul. Ramirez opened it carefully, his eyes scanning pages of handwritten notes, diagrams, formulas. 50 years of knowledge distilled into something you could hold in your hands. He wrote this all down for you, Ramirez said softly. He knew you'd need it. He knew nobody would teach me if he didn't, Cass replied. He spent 30 years in the Corps and he saw how the system worked, how it still works. So he made sure I'd have the knowledge regardless. Her voice cracked slightly. He died 2 years ago, lung cancer. He never got to see me make a shot like today, never got to see that his training worked. Ramirez handed the notebook back with a reverence usually reserved for religious text. He saw it, Specialist. Wherever he is, he saw it. He paused, then added, my daughter's 12. She wants to join the military, wants to be a Marine. I've been telling her to think about admin roles, support jobs, because I thought that's where she'd be safest, where she'd face the least resistance. He looked directly at Cass. I was wrong. I was protecting her from challenges she might be better at than I ever was. Thank you for showing me that. The convoy back to base was quiet. Men lost in their own thoughts, wrestling with realizations that don't come easy. By the time they rolled through the gate, word had already spread. The impossible shot. The coffee girl who became a legend. The mission that should have failed, but didn't. Cass climbed out of the transport and found herself facing a crowd. Support personnel, infantry officers, everyone wanted to see the woman who'd done what the best couldn't. Some faces showed respect. Others showed resentment. A few showed fear of what her success meant for their own assumptions. She walked through them without stopping, headed straight for the armory out of habit. But when she got there, someone else was already manning the desk. A young specialist with nervous eyes and clean hands. Specialist Brennan Commander Bryson said you're not assigned here anymore. He said to tell you to report to the operations center at 0600 tomorrow. Something about advanced training and pipeline prep. Cass stood there holding her rifle case, wearing a uniform that still didn't quite fit, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, probably going to get crushed again hope, but hope nonetheless. She walked to her bunk past whispers and stares and sat down on the thin mattress. She opened her grandfather's notebook to the first page. His handwriting was there, strong and clear. Patience is a weapon most people never learn to use. But you will, Cass. You will. 23 shots, 23 hits, 1 mission completed, 1 life saved. And somewhere in the mathematics of it all, 1 woman proving that the only impossible shots are the ones you never take. Sleep didn't come. Cass lay on her bunk staring at the metal ceiling while her mind replayed every shot, every calculation, every moment where physics and faith had collided at 4,000 yards. Around her, the barracks breathed with the sounds of exhausted soldiers snoring, shifting the occasional nightmare mumble. Nobody approached her bunk. Nobody congratulated her. The invisible wall that had surrounded her for 3 years had simply changed shape. Now it was made of awe instead of dismissal, but it was still a wall. At 0300, she gave up on sleep and grabbed her grandfather's notebook. She needed to recalibrate her data based on today's conditions, update the atmospheric tables, refine the formulas. The work was meditative numbers flowing like prayer. Her grandfather had taught her that good shooting was 90% preparation and 10% execution. Most snipers got that backwards. She was deep into wind gradient calculations when footsteps approached. Heavy boots, confident stride. She knew who it was before Master Chief Ramirez spoke. Figured you'd be awake. Math doesn't sleep, Master Chief. Ramirez sat on the empty bunk across from her, the springs creaking under his weight. Got word from command. The CIA officer you saved, his name is Daniel Foster. 15 years with the agency, 2 kids, both under 10, wife's a teacher in Virginia. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. He's alive because you did what we couldn't. His kids still have a father because you wouldn't stay invisible. Cass's hand stopped moving across the page. Is there a point to this, Master Chief, or are you trying to make me feel something I'm too tired to process? The point is that command is requesting you for another mission. High-value targets, similar parameters to today. They want the woman who makes impossible shots. Ramirez's voice dropped. They want you wheels up in 6 hours. I haven't slept in 22 hours. I know, I told them that. They said you can sleep on the helicopter. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This is what happens when you're good, Brennan. You don't get rest. You get used until you break, or until you prove you're unbreakable. Cass closed the notebook, her fingers tracing the worn leather. What's the target? Intel says there's a weapons shipment crossing the border at dawn. High-grade explosives probably destined for attacks on civilian centers. We've got assets on the ground who can confirm the location, but the convoy moves through a valley with exactly one choke point where a long-range interdiction is possible. After that, they disappear into urban terrain and we lose them. Let me guess, the choke point is at extreme range, 4,800 yards. And before you ask, yes, that's further than today. Yes, the wind conditions are worse. And yes, command specifically requested you because nobody else can make that shot. Ramirez's eyes were hard. You proved yourself once. Now they're going to ask you to prove it again, and again, and again. That's the price of being exceptional in a world that didn't want you to be. The bitterness in Cass's laugh surprised even her. So I get to be the performing SEAL. Watch the woman do the impossible trick. Step right up. No, Ramirez said firmly. You get to save lives that nobody else can save. You get to stop explosives that would have killed dozens, maybe hundreds. You can be bitter about how you got here, or you can accept that you're here and make it count. He stood up. You're a call specialist, but those explosives are moving whether you're on that helicopter or not. He walked away, leaving Cass alone with her notebook and her thoughts and the crushing reality that excellence didn't earn you equality, it earned you more work. She thought about saying no, thought about forcing command to acknowledge that she was human, that she needed rest, that burning out your best asset was tactically stupid. But then she thought about secondary explosions in marketplaces, about funerals for children, about the math of death versus the math of ballistics. She grabbed her gear and headed for the armory. The new specialist working the desk jumped when she entered. Ma'am, I mean specialist, I wasn't expecting. I need the CHATAC fresh ammunition and access to the meteorological data for grid sector 7903. Cass's voice had gone flat professional. And I'm not a ma'am, I work for a living. 30 minutes later, she was on a helicopter cutting through pre-dawn darkness, the rhythmic thump of rotors, the only sound louder than her thoughts. Staff Sergeant Webb was across from her, and the fact that he was here said something had fundamentally changed. Yesterday, he would have fought against her inclusion. Today, he was choosing to be part of her team. He had to shout over the noise. Intel packet is on your tablet. Target vehicle is a modified cargo truck, armor plating on the cab, probably 50 cal mounted in the bed. 6 escort vehicles, estimated 20 to 30 fighters. Cass scrolled through the data, her mind already running calculations. 4,800 yards in mountainous terrain means significant elevation change. I need exact altitude differentials between firing position and target zone. Already loaded. You're firing from an elevation of 8,200 feet. Target valley is at 6,100. Webb's voice had lost its condescension. Now it was just information transfer between professionals. Wind is going to be vicious. Weather station is reporting gusts up to 30 miles per hour at altitude. Surface wind, 12 to 15. Cass pulled out her grandfather's notebook and began working through the math. Firing downhill at that angle changed everything. The bullet would behave differently in thinner air gravity, would pull it down faster. The scope compensation would need to account for the angle. And 30-mile-per-hour gusts meant the bullet could drift 6 feet or more during flight. 6 feet at 4,800 yards was the difference between a kill shot and a complete miss. The helicopter dropped them on a ridgeline that looked like God had taken a knife to the earth and carved out a perch for angels or snipers. The wind hit immediately cold and vicious and completely unforgiving. Cass's first thought was that this shot wasn't just difficult, it was approaching genuinely impossible. Her second thought was that she'd have to make it anyway. Webb and 2 other operators began setting up a defensive perimeter while Ramirez established the spotting position. Cass built her shooting platform with hands that had gone numb within minutes of exposure. The wind wasn't just strong, it was chaotic, shifting direction every few seconds, like it was personally offended by the concept of ballistic prediction. "This is insane," one of the perimeter guards muttered. "Nobody can shoot in this." Cass didn't respond. She was watching the wind, feeling it, learning its rhythm. Her grandfather had taught her that wind wasn't random, it was patterns within patterns. And if you watched long enough, you could find the momentary calms between the gusts. Those moments were rare, maybe 3 or 4 seconds every minute, but they were there. Ramirez called out from the spotting scope. "Target convoy is approaching the valley entrance. ETA to choke point is 8 minutes. 8 minutes to set up a shot that required perfect conditions that might not exist." Cass's hands moved faster, checking the rifle's zero inputting data into the ballistic computer, cross-referencing with her grandfather's notes. The elevation change alone required 12 mils of compensation. The wind was adding another 8 to 10 mils depending on the gust timing. She was looking at holdovers that pushed the limits of what her scope could even adjust for. "Wind check," she called out. "Surface is 14, gusting to 18. Upper atmosphere is showing 26 with gusts to 32. Ramirez's voice was tight. "Brennan, I've been doing this for 16 years and I'm telling you right now, this shot is outside the realm of physics. Physics doesn't care what you think is possible, Master Chief. It just is." Cass settled into position, feeling the cold rock beneath her, the wind trying to shove her sideways, the rifle becoming an extension of her body. "I need you to call the wind shifts. Not the average, the actual gusts. I'm going to thread the needle between them." Webb's voice cut in. "What does that mean, thread the needle?" "It means I'm going to time fire during the 2-second window between gusts when the wind drops below 15 miles per hour. That window happens approximately every 45 seconds based on the pattern I'm observing." Cass's breathing had already started to slow. "When the window opens, I have maybe 1.5 seconds to take the shot before the next gust hits. And if you miss the window, then the bullet drifts 8 feet left and I get to explain to command why a truck full of explosives made it through." Her voice was ice. "I won't miss the window." 6 minutes to choke point," Ramirez announced. "Convoy is moving at approximately 35 kilometers per hour. The lead truck matches the description, armor plating heavy modification." Cass's world narrowed. The convoy was moving, which meant she wasn't just calculating for wind and distance, she was calculating for a target that would travel nearly 200 feet during the bullet's flight time. She needed to aim not at where the truck was, but where it would be in 7.4 seconds. And she needed to do it while the wind was trying to blow her round into the next province. The mathematics were approaching genuine impossibility. There were too many variables, too many moving pieces, too many opportunities for failure. Any reasonable person would have called for an airstrike, waited for better conditions, requested backup. Cass checked her calculations one more time and prepared to fire. 4 minutes, Ramirez called. The wind gusted hard enough to make the rifle shift on its bipod. Cass compensated, adjusted, waited. Her breathing fell into the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times, 4 seconds in hold for 2, 6 seconds out. Between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the space where human limitation ended and pure skill began. 3 minutes. Convoy is approaching the kill zone. Webb was watching her, and what he saw made something in his chest go tight. She wasn't nervous, wasn't hesitant. She'd gone somewhere else entirely, to a place where doubt didn't exist, because there was only math and wind and the certainty that came from perfect preparation. He'd seen that look before on the faces of the best operators he'd ever worked with. The look that said death was just another mission parameter to be calculated and executed. 2 minutes. Lead truck is entering the choke point. You've got maybe a 90-second window before the terrain changes and we lose the angle. Cass's finger moved to the trigger, not touching it yet, just hovering, waiting for the wind to tell her when. The gusts were coming in waves, hard blast, 15 seconds of chaos, momentary calm, then another blast. She'd counted 7 cycles so far, and they were consistent enough to bet on. Consistent enough to risk everything on. 1 minute. Target is in the kill zone. Wind is... Jesus, it's gusting to 34 now. The wind screamed across the ridgeline like a living thing that wanted her to fail. Cass waited. The gusts peaked, sustained, began to drop. 15 seconds of violence. Then the calm. She could feel it coming, sense it in the way the pressure changed against her face. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. The wind dropped to 13 miles per hour and held steady. Cass fired. The recoil drove into her shoulder like a familiar friend. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second and immediately began its journey through physics itself. 7.4 seconds. That's how long it would take to travel 4,800 yards while fighting wind, gravity, air resistance, and the rotation of the Earth. In the spotting scope, Ramirez watched the truck rolling forward. Target is moving. Bullet should impact in 5, 4, 3. The round struck the truck's engine block with enough force to crack the metal housing and destroy the internal mechanics in a fraction of a second. The truck lurched, engine seizing, and rolled to a stop directly in the choke point. The convoy behind it had nowhere to go. The valley walls were too steep, the road too narrow. They were trapped. Hit, Ramirez breathed. Holy God, that's a confirmed hit. Truck is disabled, convoy is stopped. But Cass was already moving to her next target. The escort vehicles will try to push through. I need to stop the second truck in line or they'll ram the disabled one out of the way. She adjusted for the changed angle, recalculated for wind that had already shifted again. Fired. The second truck died. Now there was a wall of disabled vehicles blocking the entire choke point, and the convoy was completely immobilized. Webb was on the radio calling in the ground team. Target is stopped. Repeat, target is stopped. You are clear to move in. The assault team hit the convoy from 3 directions simultaneously, and what followed was over in less than 2 minutes. Fighters who might have escaped into the mountains were pinned against the disabled trucks with nowhere to run. The explosives were secured. The mission was complete. Except Cass wasn't done. Movement on the ridgeline, 3 o'clock, 200 yards from the convoy. Looks like a spotter team setting up to call in our position. Ramirez swung his scope. Confirmed. 2 enemy fighters, one with what looks like a radio pack. Range is 4,300 yards. They're in partial cover behind rocks. I can see them, Cass said. Her rifle was already tracking. The wind had picked up again, gusting hard. These weren't vehicle engines. These were human targets, behind cover, smaller arm, harder to hit, and positioned in a spot where a miss might mean they'd successfully radio for reinforcements that could turn this victory into a bloodbath. She waited for the wind, counted the pattern, felt the gust peak and begin to fall. Fired twice in rapid succession, 3 seconds between shots, both taken in the same wind window. The first round hit the radio operator's center mass. The second hit his partner before the man could process that his friend was dead. 2 shots, 2 kills, 4,300 yards in high wind. The kind of shooting that broke people's understanding of what was humanly achievable. Webb lowered his binoculars and just stared at her. How practice, Cass said simply, and accepting that the only limits that matter are the ones physics imposes. Everything else is just people telling you what they think you can't do. The extraction went smoothly after that. The explosives were loaded onto a disposal truck, the prisoners were secured, and the assault team called in their success. By the time the sun was fully up, they were back on the helicopter, heading to base. This time, though, something was different. Webb sat down next to Cass, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight that went beyond rank or protocol. I owe you an apology, not just for today or yesterday, But for every time I saw your application and threw it in the rejection pile, I told myself I was maintaining standards. Truth is, I was maintaining bias. And that bias nearly cost us 2 missions and God knows how many lives. Cass met his eyes. I don't need your apology, Staff Sergeant. I need your commitment that the next woman who applies doesn't have to prove herself by saving lives before you take her seriously. You have it, Webb said. And that's not just words. When we get back, I'm requesting a full review of our selection process. Every application we rejected in the last 5 years gets reevaluated. Every bias gets examined. Every assumption gets challenged. Ramirez leaned over. You realize that's going to make you extremely unpopular with the old guard. The old guard can be unpopular with me first, Webb shot back. We just watched a specialist make shots that our best Master Chiefs couldn't touch. If that doesn't wake us up to how badly we've been doing this, nothing will. The helicopter touched down at base to find Commander Bryson waiting. His face was unreadable, but his posture said something had shifted in the command structure. Specialist Brennan walked with me. They moved away from the landing pad far enough that the rotor wash couldn't drown out conversation. Bryson stopped near a maintenance building and turned to face her. You've been requested by name for 4 more missions. High-value targets, extreme-range interdiction situations where conventional approaches have failed. Command wants to build an entire operational unit around your capabilities. Cass felt the exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. Sir, with respect, I've been awake for 31 hours. I've made shots that required every ounce of skill and luck I possess. If Command thinks they can just run me into the ground because I'm effective, I told them no, Bryson interrupted. I told them that we're not in the business of burning out our assets no matter how exceptional. You're getting 72 hours of mandatory rest. After that, you're entering an accelerated sniper training program, not because you need the training, but because you need the credentials. 6 weeks from now, you'll have the official qualifications that should have been yours 3 years ago. And then you get to make a choice. You can join the special operations pipeline and become part of the teams you just outperformed. Or you can help us rebuild the training program so the next generation doesn't have to fight the battles you fought just to be taken seriously. Bryson's voice softened. Either way, you're done being invisible. The question is what you want to do with visibility. Cass thought about her grandfather, about his notebook filled with 50 years of knowledge about the countless hours he'd spent teaching her because he knew the system wouldn't. She thought about Ramirez's daughter, who wanted to be a Marine, about every woman who'd been told she wasn't good enough for a job she could do better than the men holding it. I want both, she said. I want to serve on the teams, and I want to change the system. Because one exceptional woman shouldn't be the exception, she should be the beginning. Bryson smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then that's exactly what you'll do. Now get some sleep, specialist. You've earned it. Cass made it exactly 4 steps toward her bunk before the alarm sirens ripped through the base like the world was ending. Her exhausted brain took 3 full seconds to process the sound, and by then everyone around her was already running. Webb grabbed her shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. That's not a drill. We're under attack. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos when they burst through the doors. Bryson was already coordinating with 6 different units simultaneously, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Mortar team has our position. 3 rounds landed in the north sector, 2 more incoming. We've got approximately 90 seconds before they dial in our coordinates and turn this base into a crater. Ramirez was at the tactical display, his face grim. Counter-battery radar has the firing position. They're set up in the mountains 4,700 yards northeast. But they're mobile. They'll displace after the next volley and we'll lose them. Cass's exhaustion evaporated like it had never existed. Put me on a rifle. Now. Bryson spun to face her. Brennan, you have been awake for 32 hours. You're running on fumes and adrenaline. You've got nobody else who can make that shot in the time you have, sir. Put me on a rifle or start counting casualties. Her voice carried absolute certainty that left no room for argument. Those mortars hit the barracks and you're looking at 20 dead minimum. I can stop them. The building shook as another mortar round impacted somewhere too close. Bryson made his decision in the space between heartbeats. Get her the Chaytac. Someone get me a firing position with line of sight to that ridge. 60 seconds later, Haas was on the roof of the command building. With a rifle she'd already fired twice in the last 12 hours, her body screaming for rest, her mind refused to acknowledge. The mortar team was set up on a rocky outcrop that provided perfect cover and perfect firing angles. Smart professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Webb was beside her, serving as spotter because everyone else was either securing the base or treating wounded. Range is 4,700 yards. Wind is variable 15 to 22 miles per hour. Target is partially concealed behind rocks. I'm seeing 3, maybe 4 personnel. I need the mortar tube, not the personnel. They can run. The tube can't. Cass was already doing the math, her hands setting up the shot with movements that had become pure muscle memory. How long until they fire again? 30 seconds, maybe less. They're reloading now. Cass settled into position and immediately felt how wrong everything was. Her body was past tired. It had crossed into that dangerous territory where hands shake and eyes refuse to focus properly. The kind of exhaustion that got people killed. She forced her breathing to slow anyway, forced her muscles to steady, forced her mind to treat exhaustion like just another variable to compensate for. 20 seconds, Webb called out. Brennan, if you can't make this shot, I can make the shot. She'd found the mortar tube in her scope, barely visible behind the rocks, but there. The crew was loading another round. In 15 seconds, that round would launch, and in 30 seconds, it would land somewhere on this base, and people would die, unless physics and desperation could stop them. The wind gusted hard. Cass waited, counting the patterns she'd learned to read like her own heartbeat. The gust peaked, sustained, began to drop. She didn't have time for a perfect window. She'd have to take a good enough window and make it work through sheer force of will and mathematics. 10 seconds. The mortar crew was nearly ready. Cass's finger touched the trigger. The wind dropped to 18 miles per hour. Not perfect, not even good, but it was what she had. She fired. 7.2 seconds. The round traveled nearly 3 miles through air that fought it every inch of the way, dropping, drifting, but staying true to the calculations that had put it on course. It struck the mortar tube dead center, and the shaped charge round they'd been loading detonated on impact. The explosion was visible, even from this distance, a bloom of fire and smoke that consumed the position and everyone on it. Webb's voice was quiet. Confirmed kill. Mortar position is destroyed. They're not firing anything else today. Cass pulled back from the rifle and felt the world tilt sideways. Webb caught her before she went down his grip, the only thing keeping her upright. Easy, easy. You're done. You can stand down now. Report, she managed, fighting the black spots dancing in her vision. Base is secure. No friendly casualties. You just saved this entire compound with one shot while running on nothing but stubborn refusal to quit. Webb's voice held something that might have been awe or might have been concern. Now you need to sleep before you literally pass out. Commander Bryson appeared on the rooftop, took one look at Cass, and his face went hard. Get her to medical. I want a full evaluation, and I want whoever approved her for that mission while she was this exhausted written up for. I approved myself, sir. Cass interrupted, her words slurring slightly. Nobody put me on that roof except me. You needed a shot made and I made it. And nearly killed yourself doing it, Bryson snapped back. Brennan, I don't care how good you are. I need you functional for the long term, not burned out in 3 days because you think you're invincible. I'm not invincible, Cass said. I'm just better than the alternative. Then her legs gave out, and Webb had to carry her off the roof while she protested the entire way down. Medical put her in a bed and tried to make her stay there. She lasted 40 minutes before the nurse found her gone, her IV pulled out, her boots already laced. The doctor who tried to stop her made the mistake of grabbing her arm. She looked at him with eyes that had gone flat and dangerous. I've got people to train and a system to change. You can clear me, or you can get out of my way, but you're not keeping me in this bed. The doctor, a captain with 15 years of service, took one look at her face and signed the discharge papers. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and trying to keep a woman who just saved a base from mortar fire locked down in medical was definitely one of them. She found Webb in the training yard running a group of new snipers through fundamentals. He saw her coming and his expression went from surprise to resignation. You're supposed to be resting. I rested for 40 minutes. That's more sleep than I got most nights in college. Cass walked to the firing line and looked at the students, young men, all of them with confidence that came from never being told they couldn't do something. Staff Sergeant, with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate advanced wind reading techniques. Webb should have said no, should have sent her back to medical or at least to her bunk. Instead, he handed her a rifle and stepped back. Class, pay attention. You're about to see shooting that will make everything you think you know feel inadequate. She walked them through it, not the shooting itself, but the thinking behind it. How to read wind not as a single number, but as layers and patterns. How to use atmospheric data that most snipers ignored. How to calculate for variables they'd been taught to estimate. The students watched with expressions that cycled between skepticism and growing realization that they'd been learning a simplified version of a much more complex science. One of them, a corporal with medals that said he'd seen combat, raised his hand. Specialist with respect, this is way too complicated for field application. In combat, you don't have time for this level of calculation. Cass met his eyes. You're right, you don't have time for this level of calculation. That's why you practice it 10,000 times before combat, so it becomes instinct instead of math. You think I'm standing there doing algebra when I pull the trigger. I did the algebra years ago so many times that my brain does it automatically now. She walked to the firing line. What's the current wind reading? The corporal checked his instruments. 12 miles per hour left to right. Wrong. That's the surface wind. Upper atmosphere is showing 18 miles per hour with gusts to 23. The temperature differential between here and the target creates a thermal layer at approximately 1,000 yards that's going to push the round right by about 4 inches. The humidity is dropping as the sun climbs, which will increase air density and slow the round by roughly 20 feet per second over distance. Cass loaded the rifle and aimed at a target 1,500 yards downrange. Surface wind says hold 2 mils left. Real conditions say hold 0.8 mils left and add 0.3 mils elevation. Watch. She fired. The round hit center mass. The students went quiet. She fired again, same hold, same result. A third shot, same perfect placement. She handed the rifle back to the corporal. That's not magic. That's not talent. That's preparation, meeting opportunity. Now you try it. He missed, high and right exactly where surface wind calculations would have put him. Cass walked him through the corrections, showed him how to read the signs he'd been ignoring, taught him to see the invisible forces that control bullet flight. His fourth shot hit the target. Not center mass, but a hit. The look on his face said he'd just had his entire understanding of his profession restructured. She spent 3 hours with him, ignoring the exhaustion that kept trying to drag her down, refusing to quit until every student had made at least one shot using advanced calculations. By the time Webb called the session, half the class was looking at her like she was some kind of prophet, and the other half was looking at her like she just made their jobs 10 times harder. One of the students, a private who couldn't have been more than 20, approached as the others were clearing their weapons. Specialist, can I ask you something? Make it quick. I'm about 30 seconds from falling asleep standing up. How do you deal with people not believing you can do this? I mean, before they see you do it. How do you keep going when everyone's telling you you're not good enough? Cass looked at him, really looked, and saw something familiar in his eyes. The weight of being underestimated. What's your story, Private? I grew up in Appalachia. Poor family, no connections, barely graduated high school. Every instructor I've had assumes I'm stupid because of my accent and my background. I test top of my class and they act surprised every single time. His voice carried frustration that went bone deep. I'm tired of proving myself over and over to people who've already decided I'm not worth their time. Then stop proving yourself to them and start proving yourself to you, Cass said. I spent 3 years trying to make people see me. 3 years of being the best armorer, the most reliable support tech, the one who never complained or caused problems. And you know what? It didn't matter. They didn't see me until I saved a life they couldn't save. That's not fair. It's not right, but it's true. She put her hand on his shoulder. So here's what you do. You get so damn good that when your moment comes, when lives are on the line and everyone else has failed, you're ready. Not to prove them wrong, to prove yourself right. The private nodded slowly. And until that moment comes, you keep your head down, you keep training, and you keep a list of everyone who doubted you. So when you succeed, you can look at that list and remember that their limitations were never yours. She started to walk away, then turned back. In private, when you make it, and you will make it, you reach back and pull someone else up. That's how we change the system. One person at a time. She made it to the operations center before her body finally gave up. Bryson found her asleep, sitting upright in a chair, her grandfather's notebook open in her lap, a pen still in her hand. He gently removed the pen, closed the notebook, and called for someone to help move her to a bunk. She didn't wake up when they carried her. Didn't wake up when they took off her boots. Didn't wake up for 14 straight hours while her body cashed in the debt she'd been ignoring. When she finally opened her eyes, it was dark outside, and Master Chief Ramirez was sitting in a chair next to her bunk. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Cass sat up slowly, every muscle screaming. "What time is it?" 0200, you've been out for half a day." Ramirez held up a hand before she could protest. "And before you start trying to get up and go back to work, you should know that Commander Bryson has restricted you to light duty until you pass a full medical evaluation. Try to violate that order, and he'll have you confined to quarters." "Light duty?" Cass's laugh was bitter. "What does that even mean for someone in my position?" "It means you spend the next 72 hours doing what you did with those students today. Teaching, sharing knowledge, building the foundation for the changes you want to make." Ramirez leaned forward. "You proved you can shoot. Now prove you can lead." The next 3 days were the strangest of Cass's military career. She taught classes on advanced ballistics, wrote training materials that would have made her physics professors proud, and consulted on mission planning for operations she wasn't allowed to execute. Officers who'd ignored her for 3 years suddenly wanted her input. Enlisted personnel sought her advice. She went from invisible to unavoidable in the span of a week, and the whiplash was giving her emotional vertigo. On the 4th day, Commander Bryson called her to his office. She walked in expecting another mission briefing, another impossible shot to make. Instead, she found him sitting with a Marine Corps colonel she didn't recognize and a woman in civilian clothes whose posture screamed intelligence community. Bryson gestured to a chair. "Specialist Brennan, this is Colonel Martinez from Marine Corps Special Operations Command and Miss Chen from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They'd like to talk to you about your future." Colonel Martinez spoke first. "Specialist, I'll be direct. Your performance over the last week has created a significant problem for military personnel management. You're technically a support specialist with an armorer MOS. You're functionally operating at a level that exceeds most of our master-rated scout snipers. And you're doing it without any of the official credentials or training pipeline completion that would normally be required. Is this the part where you tell me I'm being court-martialed for exceeding my authority?" Cass's voice was flat. "This is the part where we offer you a choice," Ms. Chen interjected. "We can fast-track you through the official pipeline, give you the credentials you should have had from the start, and integrate you into conventional special operations units. That's option 1. What's option 2? Option 2 is more complicated. We're establishing a new unit specifically focused on extreme-range interdiction and high-value target elimination. Experimental program, small team, significant autonomy. You'd be the lead instructor and primary operator." Chen pulled out a file folder thick with classified stamps. "The program would also task you with reforming the selection and training standards across all branches to identify and develop talent that's currently being overlooked or excluded." Cass stared at the folder. "You want me to build the program that should have existed when I enlisted. We want you to build the program that will make sure the next generation doesn't have to fight the battles you fought," Colonel Martinez said. "Your performance has exposed systematic failures in how we identify, train, and utilize personnel. Those failures have cost us operational effectiveness and probably cost lives. Fixing them is a strategic priority. And if I say no to both options," Bryson's smile was grim, "then you go back to the armory and we pretend this conversation never happened. But we both know you're not going to do that." He was right. Cass looked at the file folder, thought about every woman who'd been told she wasn't good enough, every man like that, private from Appalachia, who'd been underestimated because of an accent or a background. She thought about her grandfather's notebook and the 50 years of knowledge he'd compiled because the system wouldn't teach her what she needed to know. "I want full authority over selection criteria. No more rejections based on gender background or anything except demonstrated capability." Her voice was steel. "I want access to every rejected application from the last 10 years. And I want the power to recall anyone who was turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with their actual performance." Colonel Martinez and Ms. Chen exchanged glances. Chen nodded. "Agreed. With the understanding that you'll be under intense scrutiny. A lot of people are going to be watching this program waiting for it to fail so they can justify going back to the old way of doing things." Let them watch, Cass said. I'll give them a show they won't forget. The meeting lasted another hour, covering logistics and timelines and bureaucratic details that made Cass's head hurt. By the time she walked out, she'd been promoted to sergeant, assigned to a unit that didn't technically exist yet, and given authority that would have been unthinkable a week ago. The weight of it should have felt crushing. Instead, it felt like finally being allowed to breathe. Webb found her outside the operations center, staring at the mountains where she'd made impossible shots and changed her entire trajectory. Heard you're building a new program. Heard you're going to be my second in command, whether you like it or not, Cass replied. Bryson says you volunteered. Figured you'd need someone who understands how badly we've been doing this and isn't afraid to admit it. Webb was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about all the applications I rejected. All the people I turned away because they didn't fit what I thought a sniper should look like. I need to make that right. Then help me build something better. Something that judges people on what they can do instead of who we assume they are. Deal. Webb extended his hand, Cass shook it, and in that moment something fundamental shifted. Not forgiveness the past couldn't be erased, but forward momentum, a commitment to make sure the failures that had defined her career wouldn't define anyone else's. That night, Cass sat in her bunk with her grandfather's notebook open to the last page. His final entry, written 3 weeks before he died, read, Cass, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're still fighting. Good. The fight is worth it. Not because changing the system is easy, but because the people who come after you deserve better than we gave you. Make them see what I always saw, that you were never the exception. You were just the first they couldn't ignore. Love, Grandpa. She closed the notebook and let herself cry for the first time in 3 years. Not from sadness or frustration, but from the overwhelming weight of finally being seen for exactly who she'd always been. 2/2. The rejection letters arrived 6 weeks later in a stack thick enough to use as a weapon. Cass spread them across the conference table, while Webb Ramirez and 3 other instructors watched. 247 applications rejected over the past decade. 247 people told they weren't good enough for reasons that had nothing to do with their actual capabilities. We're going to review every single one, Cass said, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. And we're going to find the ones who were turned away because someone decided their gender, their background, their accent, or their appearance mattered more than their performance. Webb picked up one file at random. Sarah Mitchell. Top scores in marksmanship, physical fitness, and tactical knowledge. Rejected because the evaluating officer noted she was too emotional during the interview. He looked up. She cried when talking about why she wanted to serve. That was 3 years ago. She's a police officer in Denver now. Call her, Cass said immediately. Today. Tell her we made a mistake and we want to fix it. Ramirez was reading another file, his face growing darker. James Chen. Son of immigrants, speaks 3 languages, scored in the 98th percentile on every test we gave him. Rejected with a note that says, cultural fit concerns. What the hell does that even mean? It means someone decided he didn't look like what they thought a sniper should look like. Cass replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. Find him, bring him in. Anyone who can score 98th percentile on our test while fighting bias deserves a second chance. They worked through the night identifying candidates, making calls, sending official letters that began with 2 words most of them never expected to read, "We're sorry." Some people hung up. Some cried. Some told them exactly where they could shove their apologies. But some enough said yes, said they'd give the military one more chance to get it right. 3 months later, the first class of the Reformed Sniper program assembled. 12 students, 4 women, 8 men, ages ranging from 22 to 37, backgrounds including inner-city Detroit, rural Montana immigrant families, wealthy suburbs, and everything in between. The only thing they had in common was that they'd all been told no before, and they'd all refused to accept it as final. Cass stood in front of them on day 1 and didn't waste time on inspirational speeches. Most of you were rejected from this program previously, some of you multiple times. The reasons given were garbage bias dressed up as standards, prejudice disguised as policy. But here's the truth. The fact that you were rejected doesn't mean you weren't good enough. It means we weren't good enough to recognize your potential. One of the students, a woman named Lisa Park, who'd been rejected twice, raised her hand. Sergeant, why should we trust that this time is different? What's to stop the next round of instructors from going back to the old way. Because this time, you're not just students, you're proof of concept. Cass walked along the line, meeting each person's eyes. Every one of you is going to be watched, scrutinized, held to standards higher than anyone who came before you. That's not fair, but it's reality. The people who want this program to fail are counting on you to wash out so they can say, "See, we were right all along." Your success isn't just personal, it's political. It's proof that the old system was broken and the new one works. A male student named Marcus Williams spoke up, his Appalachian accent thick. That's a lot of pressure to put on people who are just trying to serve their country. You're right, it is, and if that pressure is too much, the door is right there. Nobody will think less of you for walking away. Cass's voice softened slightly. But if you stay, if you push through, you're not just earning your own place. You're opening doors for everyone who comes after you. That's the real mission here. Nobody left. The training that followed was brutal in ways that had nothing to do with physical difficulty. Cass pushed them harder than any previous class because she knew the scrutiny they'd face. Every failed shot became a learning opportunity, dissected in exhaustive detail. Every mistake was analyzed not just for what went wrong, but why the students' thinking had led them there. She taught them to see shooting not as instinct, but as applied science, to treat every variable as data to be processed rather than challenges to overcome through grit alone. 2 weeks and one of the oversight officers showed up unannounced. Colonel Hendricks, a veteran instructor who'd been vocal about his opposition to the program changes. He watched a training session in silence, his face set in permanent disapproval. When Cass called a break, he approached with the kind of smile that promised trouble. "Sergeant Brennan, interesting methodology you're using. Very academic, very theoretical." His tone made it clear he considered those criticisms. But how do these students perform under pressure, real pressure, not classroom calculations? Cass met his challenge head on. "What did you have in mind, Colonel?" "Live fire exercise. Your students against a team of our current scout snipers. Multiple targets at varying ranges from up to 3,000 yards. Wind conditions, time pressure, the works." Hendricks' smile widened. "Unless you don't think they're ready for real competition." It was a trap, and everyone knew it. 2 weeks of training versus years of experience. Students who'd been rejected versus the elite who'd been accepted. If Cass's team failed, it would validate every argument against program reform. But backing down would be worse. It would suggest she didn't believe in her own students. "We'll do it," Cass said. "Tomorrow, 0800, but I have one condition." "Name it." "When my students win, you write a formal recommendation supporting the program expansion to all special operations training pipelines." Cass's voice was ice. "And when I say when, Colonel, I mean when." The next morning, both teams assembled on the range. Hendricks had brought his 5 best snipers, men with combat deployments, competition wins, and years of experience. They looked at Cass's students with barely concealed contempt. These were the rejects, the diversity hires, the social experiment that would fail and let everyone go back to business as usual. The course was punishing. 10 targets at ranges from 1,000 to 3,000 yards, wind gusting up to 20 miles per hour, time limit of 90 minutes. Each team would be scored on accuracy, speed, and ability to adjust between shots. Hendricks' team went first, and they were good. Damn good. They hit 7 out of 10 targets with 3 misses due to wind shifts they couldn't compensate for fast enough. Cass's boy students went second, and she could see the doubt in their faces. 2 weeks of training against years of experience. It seemed impossible. She gathered them together before they started. "You've been taught to think shooting is about instinct and experience. They're going to rely on that. They're going to shoot like they always have, quick adjustments, estimation, trusting their gut. You're going to shoot like scientists, calculation data, precision. Their way is faster. Your way is more accurate. The question is whether accuracy beats speed." Lisa Park took the first position. Her hands were shaking slightly as she set up, and Hendricks made sure everyone could hear his whispered comment to his team. "This should be entertaining." Lisa's first shot took 18 seconds to set up. The experienced snipers had averaged 12, but when she fired the target at 1,500 yards, took a direct hit. Her second shot took 16 seconds and hit a target at 2,200 yards that Hendricks' team had missed. By her third shot, Hendricks had stopped smiling. Marcus Williams went next. His Appalachian drawl had been the source of mockery from other students at previous training attempts, but his calculations were flawless. He hit 4 straight targets, including one at 2,800 yards that Hendrix's team hadn't even attempted. The wind had been gusting too hard, they'd said. Too unpredictable. Marcus treated it like a physics problem and solved it. The pattern continued. Sarah Mitchell, the woman rejected for being too emotional, shot with mechanical precision that ignored pressure entirely. James Chen flagged for cultural fit concerns, demonstrated wind-reading abilities that made the experienced snipers look amateur. By the time the last student finished, Cass's team had hit 9 out of 10 targets. One missed a shot at 3,000 yards, where the wind had shifted mid-flight in a way no calculation could have predicted. The silence that followed was deafening. Hendrix stared at the score sheet like it had personally betrayed him. His team of elite snipers had been outshot by students with 2 weeks of training. The implications were staggering, and he knew it. Cass walked over to him, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "I'll expect that recommendation letter by end of business today, Colonel. And sir, the next time you assume someone isn't good enough based on anything other than their performance, remember this moment. Remember that your best weren't better. They were just chosen first." Word of the competition spread through the special operations community like wildfire. Some people called it a fluke. Others demanded investigations into whether Cass's team had cheated somehow. But the data didn't lie, and the video footage showed exactly what had happened. A new methodology had beaten traditional training, and students who'd been rejected as inadequate had outperformed the supposedly elite. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Anonymous complaints about program standards. Accusations that Cass was lowering the bar to inflate success rates. Demands for her removal from the training pipeline. She weathered it all with the same patience her grandfather had taught her by letting her results speak louder than her critics' objections. 6 months into the program, one of her students made a combat shot at 4,100 yards that saved an entire platoon from an ambush. The student was Sarah Mitchell, the woman originally rejected for being too emotional. The after-action report specifically cited her ability to maintain composure under extreme pressure and execute calculations that more experienced snipers would have considered impossible. The complaints stopped after that, not because minds rarely change that fast, but because results became impossible to ignore. Cass's students were performing in combat at levels that matched or exceeded traditionally trained snipers. The data supported the methodology. The methodology supported the expanded selection criteria. And slowly, grudgingly, the old guard began to accept that maybe the system had been broken all along. 1 year after that first impossible shot in Afghanistan, Cass stood in front of a review board evaluating the program's future. The room was filled with generals, admirals, and senior officers who held the power to either expand her work across all branches or shut it down and bury the evidence that it had worked. General Morrison, Army Special Operations Command, spoke first. "Sergeant Brennan, your program's results are impressive, undeniably impressive. But they raise uncomfortable questions about how we've been conducting selection and training for decades. Questions that implicate senior leaders and established protocols. Some people in this room believe it would be easier to classify your program as an experiment that worked under specific conditions rather than evidence of systematic failure." Cass stood at attention, her voice steady. "With respect, sir, the uncomfortable questions need to be asked. We've been turning away qualified people for reasons that have nothing to do with capability. We've been training snipers to rely on instinct when science gives better results. We've been selecting based on assumptions rather than assessment. And all of that has cost us operational effectiveness and probably cost lives. You can classify this program however you want, but the truth doesn't change." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "The truth, Sergeant, is that your program has a 100% graduation rate among students who complete the first month. Traditional programs have a 40 to 50% attrition rate. Critics say you've made the training easier." "Critics haven't looked at our standards, ma'am. We haven't lowered the bar, we've changed what we're measuring. Traditional programs measure toughness and conformity. We measure precision and adaptability. Traditional programs try to break people down and rebuild them. We identify what makes each person effective and amplify it." Cass's voice carried absolute conviction. "Our graduation rate is high because we're selecting people based on ability to learn rather than ability to endure arbitrary hardship." General Morrison's expression was unreadable. And you believe this approach should be expanded across all special operations training. I believe this approach should be the default for all military training, sir. Special operations, conventional forces, support roles, all of it. We're fighting 21st century wars with 20th century selection methods. That needs to change. The room erupted. Half the officers started arguing with the other half. Voices rose. Old battle lines reformed. Cass stood silent, watching the chaos she'd created, and felt oddly at peace, because this was the fight her grandfather had prepared her for. Not the shooting was the easy part. This was the real battle, forcing an institution to confront its failures and choose whether to evolve or defend the indefensible. General Thorson called for order. When the room finally quieted, he looked directly at Cass. Sergeant, this board will deliberate and provide our recommendation to the Joint Chiefs within 30 days. Until then, your program continues as is. Silas, dismissed. Cass saluted and walked out. Webb was waiting in the hallway, his face tight with tension. How bad? Either we just changed the entire military training apparatus, or we're about to get buried so deep we'll never see daylight again, Cass replied. 50-50 odds. 28 days later, the decision came down. Program expansion approved. Methodology to be implemented across all branches over a 3-year timeline. Immediate budget allocation for instructor training and facility upgrades. And buried in the paperwork, a promotion for Cass to Master Sergeant and a commendation that would follow her for the rest of her career. She called her mother that night. The conversation was brief. Her mom had never fully understood. The military had worried constantly about her daughter in a war zone, had quietly wondered if Cass was fighting battles that didn't need fighting. Mom, I got promoted, and they're expanding the program I built. Her mother's voice cracked. Your grandfather would be so proud. I know. I wish he could have seen it. Baby, he sees it. Wherever he is, he sees it. Her mother was crying now. And more important, you did it. You made them see you. You made them see all of you. Cass hung up and sat alone in her office, surrounded by files and training plans and the massive infrastructure of institutional change. She pulled out her grandfather's notebook one more time, turning to that final page. You were never the exception. You were just the first they couldn't ignore. She picked up a pen and wrote beneath his words, You were right, Grandpa. I wasn't the exception. I was the beginning. And now there will be others. So many others that being overlooked becomes impossible. Love, Cass. 5 years later, 37% of new special operations snipers were women. Graduation rates across all demographics had increased by 42%. Combat effectiveness metrics showed measurable improvement in precision engagements. And buried in classified reports that would never be fully declassified, dozens of mission successes attributed to operators who would have been rejected under the old system. Cass Brennan eventually retired as a command sergeant major, the highest enlisted rank with a career spanning 26 years. She trained over 1,500 snipers personally. She rewrote doctrine that had stood unchanged for decades. She proved that the only impossible shots were the ones you never took, and the only impossible changes were the ones you never fought for. But more than any of that, she did what her grandfather had prepared her to do. She made patience her weapon. She made precision her proof. And she made sure that every person who came after her would be judged on their capabilities rather than someone else's assumptions. The impossible shot at 4,200 yards became legend retold in training courses and documented in military history. But the real story was never about that single moment. It was about what came after. About a woman who refused to stay invisible. About a system that finally learned to see. And about the fundamental truth that excellence doesn't care about your assumptions, it only cares about your standards, and whether you have the courage to apply them fairly. Cass kept her grandfather's notebook until the day she died. It passed to her daughter, who became a Marine Corps scout sniper, and then an instructor teaching the next generation that patience was indeed a weapon most people never learned to use. The legacy didn't end with one impossible shot or one change system. It continued in every student who was given a fair chance, every operator who made shots they'd been told were impossible, and every person who learned that the only limits that matter are the ones physics imposes. Everything else is just people telling you what they think you can't do. And the ones who listen to those people never find out what they're truly capable of.